Ever said yes to something and immediately regretted it? That sinking feeling when your calendar is packed, your to-do list is overflowing, and your energy is stretched thinner than the last slice of pizza at a party. You're not alone. In a world that celebrates busyness like a badge of honor, overcommitment has become the silent thief of our peace. But what if there was an ancient philosophy, tested by time and honed by some of history's greatest minds, that could help you reclaim your time, your focus, and your sanity? Enter Stoicism, a 2,000-year-old toolkit for modern overwhelm. Picture this: Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, juggling wars, political intrigue, and the weight of an empire on his shoulders. Yet his personal writings reveal a man who refused to let external chaos dictate his inner calm. Or Epictetus, born into slavery, who taught that while we can't control what happens to us, we can always control how we respond. These weren't just thinkers, they were doers, and their wisdom cuts through the noise of our hectic lives like a knife. Stoicism isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about mastering the art of discernment, knowing what deserves your energy and what doesn't. Today, we're diving into 25 Stoic reflections designed to help you stop overcommitting and start living with intention. These aren't abstract theories. They're practical, battle-tested principles that will help you set boundaries without guilt, prioritize what truly matters, and say no with confidence. Imagine a life where your time aligns with your values, where you're no longer pulled in 10 directions at once, and where every yes is deliberate instead of desperate. That's the power of Stoicism. So if you're ready to trade overwhelm for clarity, let's begin this journey together. The first and perhaps most profound Stoic reflection for avoiding overcommitment comes down to one fundamental truth: understanding what's truly within your control. The ancient Stoics called this the dichotomy of control, and it's the cornerstone of their philosophy. Picture a ship captain. He can't control the wind or the waves, but he can adjust the sails and steer the rudder. That's the essence of Stoic wisdom, recognizing the difference between what we influence and what we don't. So much of our stress and overwhelm comes from trying to manage things outside our power: other people's opinions, unexpected setbacks, even the weather. But here's the liberating shift. When you focus only on your own choices, your effort, your attitude, your boundaries, suddenly, the weight of unnecessary obligations falls away. Think about how often we say yes out of fear of disappointing others, fear of missing out, fear of being seen as incapable. But Stoicism asks, why exhaust yourself trying to control reactions that aren't yours to manage? Imagine you're asked to lead another work project while already stretched thin. The Stoic approach wouldn't be to blindly accept it and hope for the best. Instead, you'd ask, is this request within my control? No, the company's needs aren't up to you, but your response, that's entirely yours. You might negotiate deadlines, delegate tasks, or even decline respectfully. By focusing only on what you can shape, your actions, you avoid the trap of overcommitting to compensate for external chaos. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journals, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. That strength isn't just about enduring, it's about clarity. When you stop trying to micromanage the uncontrollable, you free up energy for what matters. A modern example: social commitments. You can't control a friend's disappointment if you decline their party invite, but you can control whether you sacrifice your much-needed rest to please them. Every time you choose based on what's yours to command, you build a life of intention, not obligation. This is how Stoicism transforms overwhelm into ownership. One deliberate decision at a time. Here's a principle that changes everything. Saying no is not a rejection, it's a redirection of your most precious resource, your time and energy. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who taught that freedom comes from discerning what's truly ours to give, put it bluntly: if you wish to have time for what matters, you must first rob the trivial of its authority over you. That's the heart of it. Every casual yes to something unimportant is a silent no to something essential. But how do we decline requests without guilt or friction? The Stoics didn't just preach this idea, they gave us a blueprint for graceful assertiveness. Start by recognizing that your time is not a public commodity. It's the raw material of your life's work. When someone asks for a favor, a meeting, or your presence, pause and ask the Stoic question, does this align with my core responsibilities and values? If not, declining isn't selfish, it's stewardship. Epictetus advised framing refusals with clarity and kindness, not excuses. Instead of "I'm swamped," which invites debate, try "I'm focusing on prior commitments right now," or "That doesn't fit my current priorities, but I appreciate you thinking of me." These phrases honor your boundaries while respecting the asker. Consider the modern worker who's asked to join yet another non-essential committee. The Stoic response isn't resentment or reluctant agreement, it's measured detachment. You might say, "I can't contribute fully to this, so I'll step aside to let someone else lead." No drama, no over-explaining, just truth. This echoes Marcus Aurelius's reminder, you don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you. The art of no isn't about harshness, it's about reclaiming your agency. Every unnecessary commitment you avoid isn't just time saved, it's peace preserved, focus sharpened, and energy reinvested where it belongs. What makes this Stoic approach so powerful is its neutrality. You're not judging the request or the requester, you're simply honoring your own capacity. Picture a gardener pruning a tree. Cutting away excess isn't cruelty, it's what allows the remaining branches to thrive. That's the mindset shift. When you say no with conviction, you're not rejecting others, you're affirming yourself. And over time, this practice doesn't just protect your calendar, it reshapes how others perceive your time. They begin to value it as you do because you've shown them how. Marcus Aurelius kept a journal not to record events, but to refine his focus, a practice that transformed mere planning into purposeful living. Every morning, he'd write reminders like, "Ask yourself at dawn, what is it I'm about to do today? Does it serve my purpose or distract from it?" This wasn't just introspection, it was a filtering system for his energy. Stoics understood that clarity isn't innate, it's constructed, one deliberate question at a time. And in our era of endless demands, this habit isn't just useful, it's revolutionary. Imagine standing in front of a closet stuffed with clothes you never wear. That's what an unexamined schedule looks like, cluttered with commitments that don't fit who you are or who you aspire to be. The Stoic solution: define your non-negotiables before requests flood in. Start by identifying your 3 or 4 core values, perhaps family, creative work, health, or community. These aren't vague ideals, they're litmus tests for every yes or no. When an invite or opportunity arises, hold it against your priorities like a sculptor chiseling away excess stone. Does this commitment strengthen my health or drain it? Does it expand my capacity for meaningful work or fracture my focus? Consider how Marcus navigated leading Rome while raising a family and maintaining his philosophical studies. He didn't balance these roles by accident, he designed his days around them, letting lesser tasks fall away. A modern parallel: the entrepreneur who blocks mornings for deep work because building her business is a top value, or the parent who declines late networking events to read bedtime stories. These choices aren't sacrifices, they're acts of allegiance to what matters most. Here's the key distinction Stoicism reveals: priorities aren't about what you want to do, they're about what you refuse to neglect. That's why journaling works. It externalizes your values, making them tangible. Try this tonight. Write down one thing you'll protect tomorrow at all costs: an hour of learning, a workout, an uninterrupted meal with loved ones. Then, when distractions arise, and they will, you're not deciding in the moment, you're upholding a pre-made commitment. This is how Stoics bypass the fatigue of constant choice. They don't rely on willpower, they engineer their environment to reflect their convictions. the beauty of this practice, it transforms overwhelm into ownership. When you know your priorities with marrow-deep certainty, saying no becomes an affirmation rather than a refusal. As Seneca wrote, "If a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favorable." Define your port, and the trivial loses its power to steer you off course. Seneca's letters cut through the noise of our modern chaos with a truth that stings at first, then liberates. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. The Stoic philosopher wasn't just criticizing laziness, he was exposing how we fracture our attention across too many trivial pursuits, mistaking motion for progress. Picture a baker scattering flour across every counter instead of kneading one loaf at a time. That's what overcommitment does. It spreads us thin until nothing rises. Consider how Seneca describes the life of his wealthy friend Liberalis, who complained of constant fatigue despite having servants, property, and leisure. The problem wasn't lack of time, it was the illusion that saying yes to everything would lead to fulfillment. Life is long enough if you know how to use it, Seneca argued, pointing out that we drown ourselves in shallow commitments while neglecting what gives depth to our days. The Stoic remedy intentional scarcity. Instead of asking, "Can I fit this in?" ask, "Does this deserve a place in my life?" The ancient Stoics had a powerful metaphor for this: the archer. A skilled archer doesn't shoot at every target, they choose one, pull back with full focus and release. Every distraction, every unnecessary yes is another arrow wasted. This contrasts sharply with modern glorification of busyness, where we wear exhaustion like a medal. But here's what Seneca knew: purpose isn't measured in tasks completed, but in impact created. Imagine two gardeners, one plants 100 seeds haphazardly across a field, the other tends 5 fruit trees with care, who enjoys a richer harvest. That's the power of less. When you prune commitments ruthlessly, what remains grows stronger. A modern example: the writer who declines 3 mediocre projects to craft 1 meaningful book, or the leader who attends fewer meetings to make space for strategic thinking. Seneca's most radical idea was that subtraction isn't loss, it's liberation. In one letter, he describes emptying his schedule as creating a clearing in the dense forest of obligations. That clearing is where clarity grows, so next time you're tempted to add another item to your overflowing plate, ask the Stoic question: will this dilute or deepen what truly matters? Sometimes the most powerful action is creating space for nothing at all, because in that emptiness, purpose finds room to breathe. There's a reason the Stoics kept skulls on their desks and whispered Memento Mori, remember you must die, to themselves like a mantra. This wasn't morbid fascination, it was the ultimate filter for discerning what deserved their limited time. Imagine holding an hourglass where the sand represents your life's days. Each grain is irreplaceable. Would you casually let it spill for trivial pursuits? That's the piercing clarity mortality brings. The Roman statesman Cato the Younger, known for his unshakable integrity, would ask himself each morning, is this the day I'll die? Not to paralyze himself with fear, but to sharpen his focus. If today were his last, would he waste it on petty arguments or hollow obligations? The answer dictated his actions. History brims with those who harnessed this reflection. Take Leonardo da Vinci, who carried a notebook inscribed, "While I thought I was learning how to live, I have been learning how to die." His relentless curiosity wasn't scattered, it was directed. He abandoned unfinished commissions when they no longer served his growth despite patrons' protests. Why? Because death's whisper clarified what was worth leaving behind. Or consider Queen Elizabeth I, who ruled England's golden age while bearing a ring engraved with a skeleton, a reminder that even a monarch's time was finite. Her refusal to marry, controversial as it was, stemmed from this Stoic reckoning. She wouldn't sacrifice her nation's stability for personal or political expediency. Modern life disguises mortality behind screens and schedules, but the principle remains urgent. A CEO client once told me he cleared his calendar of all but 3 priorities after surviving a heart attack. I realized I'd been trading days I didn't have for meetings that didn't matter. He said, "That's Memento Mori in action, not as panic but as liberation." When a friend invites you to an event out of obligation, or your boss pushes a low-impact project, ask the Stoic question, if this were my last year, would I choose this? The answer cuts through noise like sunlight through fog. Here's the paradox the Stoics uncovered: confronting death doesn't shrink life, it expands it. Seneca wrote, "He who fears death will never do anything worthy of a living man." But flip that insight: he who accepts death stops postponing what matters. That committee meeting you dread, the inbox guilt, the social commitments that drain you, mortality strips away their false urgency. What remains are the projects that ignite you, the people who deepen you, the quiet moments that nourish you. This reflection isn't about grim tallying, it's about fierce reverence. Every no becomes a yes to something richer. Every cleared obligation creates space for what's alive. The Japanese have a practice called kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold to honor its history. Memento Mori does the same for time. It shows us the cracks where our attention leaks so we can mend them with intention. Your mortality isn't a threat, it's the compass that points unerringly toward what's worthy of your fleeting, precious days. Use it not with dread but with gratitude. After all, it's the very impermanence of life that makes each choice sacred. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who shaped Epictetus' thinking, had a radical view of time that flips modern productivity culture on its head. While today's world tells us to fill every hour with activity, he argued that protecting empty space in your schedule isn't laziness, it's strategy. Picture an ancient city under siege. Its gates aren't left open for anyone to wander in, and its walls aren't weakened by careless breaches. Your time deserves that same vigilance, Rufus famously said. We're entrusted with our lives as if they were funds that must be spent wisely, but most people squander time as if it were limitless. That's the core insight. We treat our hours like renewable resources when they're actually vanishing treasures. The first practical defense against time thieves. Scheduling white space. The Romans called this otium, leisure with purpose. Not idle hours, but intentional gaps that absorb life's inevitable disruptions. Think of a CEO who blocks 90 minutes after major meetings, not because she's unproductive, but because she knows reflection and recalibration are what make the meetings matter. Or consider the software developer who schedules buffer Wednesdays to handle unexpected bugs rather than working frantic weekends. These aren't luxury practices, they're Stoic disciplines in disguise. Rufus taught that interrupting a task to address every new demand is like trying to build a house while handing out bricks to every passerby who asks for one. Then there's obligation creep, the silent killer of focused days. It starts innocently, saying yes to a quick coffee that turns into an unplanned work session, agreeing to just one more committee because you feel guilty. The Stoic antidote: treat all new commitments like unverified visitors knocking at your fortress gate. Before lowering the drawbridge, ask Rufus's 3 questions. Does this align with my core duties? Will future me regret trading this time? What existing priority must shrink to accommodate this? Ancient Athenian generals used this filter when evaluating battle requests they knew spreading troops too thin meant losing everywhere. A modern application might look like this: when a colleague asks for just 15 minutes that historically becomes an hour, respond with, "I can give you focused attention at 3 p.m. For exactly 20 minutes, would that work? This isn't rigidity, it's respect for both parties' time. Rufus warned that people who can't say no become like public fountains. Their resources flow freely until nothing remains for their own gardens. The most profound takeaway: time protection isn't selfishness, it's stewardship. Just as Roman soldiers polished their armor daily, not out of vanity but preparedness, scheduling buffers, and resisting obligation creep are how we maintain the capacity to show up fully when it counts. The Stoics didn't guard their calendars to avoid work. They did it so their yeses carried weight. As Rufus put it, a man who knows the value of his hours builds a life. One who doesn't merely assembles fragments. Those fragments might look productive in the moment, but like broken pottery, they hold nothing of substance. Your fortress walls aren't to keep life out, they're to ensure what enters enriches rather than depletes you. The line between duty and ego is thinner than we'd like to admit, and nowhere is this clearer than in our commitments. The Stoics had a razor-sharp litmus test for distinguishing the two. Is this obligation rooted in service or in self-image? Take Seneca's warning. A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary. People-pleasing, overachieving, and martyrdom often disguise themselves as responsibility, but peel back the layers and you'll find ego masquerading as virtue. Imagine two neighbors shoveling snow. One clears his own walk and helps an elderly resident nearby, that's duty. The other plows every driveway on the block while inwardly tallying praise, that's ego in a hero's costume. Marcus Aurelius confronted this illusion daily in his role as emperor. His journals reveal a leader who saw public service not as a stage for admiration, but as an opportunity to exercise justice and wisdom. When advisors urged him to host lavish games to boost his popularity, he refused, writing, "It's madness to seek the hollow applause of others while neglecting your own standards." That's the Stoic distinction. Authentic duty aligns with your principles, not your pride. A modern parallel, the manager who stays late to mentor a struggling team member out of genuine care, duty, versus the one who does it to be seen as the office hero, ego. Both actions might look identical externally, but the energy behind them is worlds apart. Epictetus took this further by exposing how ego-driven commitments drain us. When someone boasts of reading countless books, he observed, ask if they've mastered their own mind. The same applies to commitments. Saying yes to every committee, project, or social event to prove your worth doesn't demonstrate strength. It reveals a fragile dependency on external validation. Ancient Stoics called this prosopon, the Greek word for mask. Every time we overcommit to maintain an image, we're not serving others, we're performing for them. Consider the parent who volunteers for every school event while resenting the time away from family. Their sacrifice seems noble, but Stoicism would challenge, is this service or self-deception? True duty never demands the betrayal of your core values. The Stoic teacher Hierocles illustrated this with his concentric circles model. Your first duty is to your inner circle: health, family, purpose, then radiating outward. Pouring energy into distant commitments while neglecting your center isn't altruism. It's virtue signaling to yourself. Here's the pivot. Ego clings to commitments as trophies. Duty holds them lightly, ready to release what no longer serves. When Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, lost his merchant fleet in a shipwreck, he didn't scramble to rebuild his wealth for status. Instead, he famously turned to philosophy, saying, "Fortune has done me a favor by forcing me into what matters." That's the clarity that comes when duty is divorced from ego. Your commitments become lean, intentional, and powerful, not because they're numerous, but because they're true. So next time you're tempted to say yes, pause and ask the Stoic double question. Am I doing this because it's right or because it's impressive? The answer will either fortify your integrity or expose a trap. As Marcus wrote, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. Not by adding more to your plate, but by ensuring every item on it nourishes your character rather than your reputation. That's how duty, stripped of ego, becomes liberation. There's a quiet rebellion hidden in Stoicism, one that challenges the very air we breathe in modern society, the myth that constant striving equals worth. Seneca put it bluntly, it's not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. This isn't anti-ambition, it's a precision strike on aimless hunger. Picture two farmers. One plants just enough grain to feed his family and share with neighbors, finding joy in the rhythm of seasons. The other endlessly expands his fields, chasing the horizon, too busy to taste his own harvest. The Stoics ask which one is truly rich. Our culture glorifies the grind-hustle porn that equates exhaustion with virtue, but the ancient Stoics saw through this. Epictetus, born a slave, understood real freedom wasn't in accumulating more tasks, but in mastering the art of enough. He warned students, when you let society define your limits, you build your prison with their measuring sticks. Modern research echoes this. Studies show that after basic needs are met, increased wealth and commitments don't correlate with happiness. Yet we keep layering on responsibilities like armor, hoping the weight will make us feel important. Take the Silicon Valley executive who brags about 80-hour workweeks while his health crumbles. From a Stoic lens, this isn't dedication, it's distraction. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When we obsess over endless growth, we stain our capacity for contentment. Contrast this with Japanese ikigai, the concept of finding purpose at the intersection of what you love, what the world needs, and just enough to sustain it. No excess, no lack. Here's where Stoicism gets radical. It suggests that overcommitment often stems not from necessity, but from fear of irrelevance, of stillness, of facing who we are without the noise. Imagine clearing your schedule of everything non-essential for a month. What terrifying voids might appear, what truths might surface. That discomfort is precisely why we stay busy. The Stoics prescribed voluntary discomfort not to punish, but to prove we need far less than we think. Seneca would sleep on the floor monthly, not because he had to, but to remember. He who adapts himself to bare necessities has conquered every fortune. Modern applications abound. The minimalist movement, the quiet quitting trend misnamed. It's really about working with boundaries. Even corporate America is catching on, with firms like Basecamp capping workweeks at 32 hours and thriving. These aren't rejections of achievement, they're course corrections toward meaningful contribution. When a graphic designer turns down a fourth client to perfect her craft rather than dilute it, she's practicing Stoic enoughness. When a father leaves the office at 5 to coach Little League, he's not underperforming, he's redefining success. The key insight: contentment isn't the enemy of ambition, it's the compass. As Musonius Rufus taught, we admire the purity of a mountain stream not because it floods, but because it flows exactly as it should, neither more nor less. Your commitment should mirror that clarity. Next time you're tempted to add another yes to your life, ask the Stoic twin questions. Will this deepen my capacity to contribute or merely inflate my sense of importance? The answer separates purpose from posturing. Enough isn't a stopping point, it's the foundation from which true excellence rises. Zeno's paradox illustrates this perfectly. Imagine chasing the horizon. No matter how fast you run, it always retreats. That's ambition untethered from enough. Now picture planting an orchard where you stand. With each season, your roots deepen, your fruit nourishes others, and your shade offers rest. The horizon hasn't moved, but you've stopped straining toward illusions and started cultivating what's real. That's the Stoic art of enough, not lack. Not laziness, but liberation to invest wholly where it counts. The Stoics had a practice that might sound counterintuitive at first. They deliberately imagine worst-case scenarios, not to spiral into anxiety, but to strip away illusions about their choices. They called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Think of it as a mental fire drill. By anticipating what could go wrong, you're never caught unprepared. But here's where it gets powerful for overcommitment. This exercise forces you to confront the hidden costs of every yes before you say it. Picture this: you're asked to lead another project at work. The ego whispers you can handle it, while the calendar screams otherwise. Instead of reacting, apply premeditatio malorum. close your eyes and fast forward 3 months. What does success look like? Sleepless nights, missed birthdays, a body running on caffeine and cortisol. The Stoics weren't pessimists, they were realists. They knew that every commitment steals time from something else, and visualizing those trade-offs inoculates you against impulsive agreements. Here's how to practice it step by step. First, name the opportunity. Let's say it's joining a non-profit board. Sounds noble, right? Now pause. Second, list 3 inevitable consequences. Your Saturday mornings vanish, your creative projects stall, and your partner grows resentful from cancelled plans. Third, sit with that reality for 60 seconds. Feel the tension in your shoulders, the exhaustion behind your eyes. That's not hypothetical. It's the future you're signing up for. Finally, ask, are these costs worth the benefits, not theoretically, but viscerally? History's great decision-makers used versions of this tool. Benjamin Franklin would divide a sheet of paper into pros and cons, but with a twist, he'd sit with each column for days, letting the emotional weight of each consequence settle. Modern research validates this. A Harvard study found that people who mentally simulated future stressors made better long-term choices than those who relied on logic alone. Why? Because neurons that fire together wire together. Your brain starts associating that new commitment with its true cost. Consider a real-world example. A client of mine, a brilliant surgeon, was asked to chair a hospital committee. She loved the prestige but used premeditatio malorum to imagine the ripple effects. Surgeries performed while fatigued, her daughter's piano recitals attended via Zoom. She declined, and 6 months later told me it was the first time she'd prioritized being a great doctor and mother over looking like one. That's the Stoic edge. It's harder to romanticize overcommitment when you've already lived its consequences in your mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The cucumber is bitter, throw it away. There are brambles in the path, step aside." Simple enough, until we convince ourselves the bitter cucumber is fine or the brambles are temporary. Premeditatio malorum removes that self-deception. You don't just see the thorns, you feel them prick, and suddenly that urgent request loses its power over you. The next time you're tempted to add another plate to your spinning act, pause, close your eyes, and let your future self show you what that yes truly costs. Sometimes the most courageous act isn't taking on more, it's seeing clearly enough to refuse. Seneca once compared those who chase endless tasks to a farmer who scatters seeds across barren ground instead of nurturing a single fertile field. The harvest is always meager, no matter how frantic the effort. This image cuts to the heart of modern burnout. We mistake breadth for impact, forgetting that true mastery and peace comes from depth. The Stoics didn't just admire focus, they built entire lives around it. Epictetus, for instance, spent decades teaching in the same small classroom, turning the same few principles over like precious stones in sunlight, revealing new facets with each rotation. His students didn't get a buffet of shallow wisdom, they received an immersion in what mattered. Consider how this clashes with today's cult of multitasking. We wear our ability to juggle emails, meetings, and side hustles like badges of honor, yet neuroscience confirms what Seneca intuited. The brain doesn't parallel process, it rapidly toggles, leaving each task half-baked. A Stanford study found heavy multitaskers perform worse on cognitive tests than their focused peers. Why? Because, as Marcus Aurelius noted, the mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. Every fractured commitment trains your brain for distraction, not depth. The Stoic alternative, selective mastery. Imagine 2 blacksmiths. One produces 100 mediocre blades a month, the other crafts a single masterpiece per season. Over a lifetime whose work endures, this isn't just about quality, it's about the quiet joy of knowing one thing deeply. When Seneca advised Lucilius to narrow your scope to match your brief lifespan, he wasn't advocating smallness, he was mapping the path to real influence. Marie Curie embodied this when she refused distractions during her radium research, writing, I was taught that the way of progress is neither swift nor easy. Her focused rigor altered science forever. Practical application starts with pruning. Audit your commitments like a vineyard manager assessing vines which ones bear fruit and which merely drain resources. A tech CEO client of mine used this principle to cut his product line from 12 apps to 3. Revenue didn't drop, it concentrated, allowing breakthroughs that made his tools industry standards. That's the paradox. Depth creates more lasting impact than breadth ever could. The Stoics took this further with negative capability, the art of leaving potential unexploited. Just as a forest needs unplanted spaces to thrive, your mind needs unexplored paths to maintain creative resilience. Da Vinci spent years sketching hands not because he lacked other ideas, but because depth in one area illuminated others. When you resist scattering your energy, you're not missing opportunities, you're preparing to seize the right ones with both hands. Seneca's warning about scattered seeds wasn't just agricultural metaphor, it was neurological truth. Every yes fragments attention, every no to the trivial is a yes to mastery. The modern world will always demand more surfaces from you. The Stoic reply is simple: dig deeper. Not where the crowd is shoveling, but where your unique strength meets the world's unspoken need. That's where your harvest waits, not in the exhausted soil of busyness, but in the rich earth of chosen depth. Epictetus drew a line in the sand 2,000 years ago that still saves modern lives, not with ink, but with perspective. Some things are up to us, he taught, and some are not. Simple words, yet revolutionary when applied to the minefield of expectations we navigate daily. The Stoic distinction between what's yours to carry and what belongs to others isn't just philosophy, it's emotional self-defense. Picture a neighbor who repeatedly asks you to feed their cat while they vacation. At first, it's kindness. By the fifth request, it's an unpaid job. Where's the line? For Epictetus, the answer lay in ownership. The cat's hunger is the neighbor's concern. Your willingness to help is yours. Confusing the two creates resentment disguised as generosity. Consider how this plays out at work. A colleague misses a deadline, then pleads for your rescue. The modern reflex is to step in. After all, teamwork matters. But Stoicism asks, whose problem are you solving? Their poor planning isn't your emergency unless you make it so. This isn't callousness, it's clarity. Epictetus trained his students to respond to such requests with a gentle but firm question. What part of this is mine to own? Think of a manager who habitually dumps last-minute tasks on your weekend plans. Saying, "I can't this time," isn't shirking responsibility. It's returning misplaced ownership to its rightful holder. The genius of this approach lies in its neutrality. You're not judging the other person's needs or labeling them burdensome. You're simply noticing where your agency begins and ends. Marcus Aurelius modeled this as emperor when provinces demanded bailouts after poor harvests. He helped when it aligned with Rome's greater good, but refused when it rewarded negligence, writing, "To do good is noble, to enable helplessness is harm." Modern parallels abound. The adult child who expects parental bailouts after reckless spending, or the friend who treats your emotional labor as their free therapy. Role-playing sticky scenarios makes this concrete. Imagine your sibling asks you to co-sign a loan for their third failed business venture. The Stoic response starts with 3 questions. Is this my financial obligation? No. Does rescuing them now prevent future recklessness? Unlikely. What lesson does my no teach that my yes never could? Self-reliance. This isn't about withholding help, it's about distinguishing support from enabling. Epictetus took it further with what we'd now call emotional boundaries. When students complained about others' criticism, he'd reply, "Why are you troubled by what doesn't belong to you?" That external opinion lives in someone else's mind, a territory beyond your jurisdiction. A modern manager might obsess over a subordinate's grumbling. The Stoic remix, their dissatisfaction is theirs to manage. My leadership is mine to refine. The ultimate test comes when others mistake your boundaries for betrayal. Here, the Stoics were uncompromising. Musonius Rufus taught that preserving your capacity to serve where it counts sometimes requires disappointing those who dilute it. Picture a dedicated nurse who refuses extra shifts to protect her patient care standards. Colleagues may grumble, but the ward benefits more from her sustained excellence than her exhausted compliance. What makes this reflection timeless is its compassion for yourself. Every problem you falsely own is energy stolen from your true responsibilities. Like a gardener who wastes water nourishing weeds, we drain ourselves nurturing obligations that were never seeds we planted. Epictetus's boundary isn't a wall, it's a trellis. It doesn't keep life out, it lets your best growth climb toward the light. The Stoics didn't wait for life to toughen them, they trained like athletes preparing for a marathon of adversity. Their secret weapon, voluntary discomfort. Picture a soldier who chooses to sleep on the ground before deployment, not because he must, but because he knows comfort is a trap. That's the essence of this practice, deliberately saying no to small conveniences today, so you can say no to crushing demands tomorrow. Musonius Rufus took this to extremes, eating plain food, wearing thin clothes in winter, and sleeping on hard beds not as punishment but as empowerment. His logic was razor sharp. How can you refuse a dictator's demands if you can't even refuse an extra slice of cake? This translates directly to modern boundary setting. Every time you endure the temporary discomfort of declining an invite, resisting an impulse purchase, or silencing notifications during deep work, you're not just protecting your time, you're strengthening your no muscle. Neuroscience backs this. Each conscious refusal triggers activity in the prefrontal cortex, the brain's command center for self-regulation, while weakening the amygdala's panic response to potential conflict. Essentially, you're rewiring your reflexes from knee-jerk people-pleasing to intentional choice. Consider two colleagues. One never misses a free lunch at work, always stays late when asked, and checks emails constantly to avoid missing out. The other regularly skips office meals to eat mindfully alone, leaves at 5:30 unless it's truly urgent, and batches communication. Who do you think gets steamrolled when real crisis hits? As Seneca observed, the man who hasn't learned to want little will always be a slave. Start small. Next time someone asks, can you quickly pause? Feel that instinctive yes rising. That's the reflex to override. Try, let me check my commitments and get back to you, creating space between request and response. Or volunteer for minor discomforts. Take cold showers, skip dessert, leave your phone behind on walks. These aren't masochistic drills, they're vaccinations against the epidemic of overcommitment. The magic lies in the cumulative effect. Just as marathoners build endurance 1 mile at a time, your capacity for graceful refusal grows through micro-practices. Epictetus captured this perfectly. No great thing is created suddenly, any more than a bunch of grapes or a fig. If you tell me you desire a fig, I answer that there must be time. Let it first blossom, then bear fruit, then ripen. Your no blossoms in tiny acts of resistance, bears fruit in guarded time, and ripens into unshakable conviction. That's how voluntary discomfort transforms from philosophy to armor, not against life, but for the life you actually want. Marcus Aurelius ended each day with a question modern productivity gurus would envy. What have I today undone? Not what he'd achieved, but what he'd wisely released. The Stoics understood that commitment audits aren't occasional tune-ups, they're lifelines. Imagine your obligations as ropes tied to your waist. Some pull you toward purpose, others drag you underwater. The difference, regular inspection. This isn't about time management, it's about virtue alignment. Start with the Stoic quarterly review. Every 3 months aligned with nature's seasons. Set aside an hour with 3 columns on parchment or spreadsheet. Sustains me, drains me, and why continue? For each commitment, ask Epictetus' litmus test. Does this cultivate my highest self, That volunteer role teaching underprivileged kids might drain energy but sustain meaning. Keep it. The prestigious committee feeding only your resumes hunger. Cut the rope. The ancient Athenians had a practice called ostracism, where citizens would vote to exile those threatening communal harmony. Apply that radical clarity to your calendar. Consider the template Seneca unwittingly left us in his letters to Lucilius. First, list every recurring obligation, yes, even that monthly book club you dread. Next, rate each on 2 scales: contribution to virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, temperance, and emotional residue, dread versus renewal. Finally, apply the deathbed test. If today were your last, which commitments would you regret maintaining? A client of mine discovered through this audit that 80% of her urgent meetings contributed nothing to her actual role. She eliminated them and doubled her impact. The brilliance of Stoic auditing lies in its fluidity. Unlike rigid productivity systems, it acknowledges that what serves you in spring may strangle you by winter. Take public speaking. Terrifying but expanding for a junior employee becomes soul-deadening repetition for a veteran. That's when you invoke Cotto's wisdom. He famously stepped away from political glory when it conflicted with his integrity, saying, "I'd rather be asked why I have no statue than why I do." Practical steps: block post-audit days for pruning. Cancel 2 commitments immediately, not tomorrow, when guilt creeps back. Inform stakeholders with Spartan brevity. I'm realigning my priorities and will no longer be participating. No apologies, no over-explaining. Then observe the miracle. The world doesn't collapse. In fact, space emerges for what Cicero called otium cum dignitate, leisure with dignity. That abandoned committee slot gets filled by someone for whom it's genuinely nourishing. The final audit question comes from Musonius Rufus: if stripped of this obligation, who would I become? Often we cling to roles that no longer fit, like outgrown armor. A CEO client realized he was chairing 5 boards out of habit, not purpose. His exit letters simply stated, "It's time for new voices." The result: younger leaders flourished while he reclaimed time for mentoring. That's the Stoic Review's hidden gift. It doesn't just clear your schedule. It clears the way for others' growth too. We wear exhaustion like a crown, mistaking haste for purpose and chaos for importance. The Stoics saw this coming 2,000 years ago. Seneca warned, "Life is long if you know how to use it," then added the dagger twist, "But we squander it as if drawn from an inexhaustible supply." That's the busyness trap, confusing motion for meaning. Picture 2 chefs. One frantically chops everything in sight while the other selects a few perfect ingredients with care. Who serves the memorable meal? The modern obsession with packed calendars mirrors that frantic chopping. We mistake quantity of activity for quality of existence. Consider Seneca's daily ritual, his evening walks. Not power walks with podcasts, not step-counting marches, but aimless ambles where he'd meet himself as he wrote. In our terms, he scheduled purposeless time. Not meditation apps with guided prompts, not walking meetings, just space to let the mind wander. What sounds like inefficiency was actually precision engineering of the soul. Neuroscience now confirms what Seneca sensed, that breakthrough ideas emerge during undirected thought, when the brain's default mode network activates. The very wasted moments we purge from our schedules are where insight incubates. The Stoics diagnosed busyness as a fear masquerading as virtue. Epictetus nailed it. Man is disturbed not by things, but by the view he takes of them. Apply that to modern hustle culture. That colleague who brags about back-to-back meetings, they're not describing productivity, they're confessing their terror of stillness. Research shows the average knowledge worker spends less than 2 hours daily on meaningful work, buried under faux urgency. Ancient Stoics would recognize this. They watched Roman elites fill their days with empty rituals to avoid facing their hollow pursuits. Here's the pivot. Intentional slowness isn't laziness, it's resistance. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "No surplus words, no unnecessary actions," he wasn't advocating robotic efficiency. He was describing the elegance of a life stripped of performative effort. Modern parallels emerge in unexpected places: the slow food movement, the resurgence of handwritten letters. Even tech pioneers like Twitter co-founder Evan Williams taking Thinking Wednesdays offline. These aren't rejections of progress, they're course corrections away from empty motion. Try this Stoic speed test. For 1 week, add a why to every calendar entry. Why this meeting? Why this errand today? Like pruning a rose bush, you'll spot 2 types of dead wood: obligations that serve no purpose and worthy tasks done with rushed indifference. The first gets cut, the second gets expanded. A client of mine discovered he spent 3 hours weekly on reports no one read, but crammed family dinners into 20 distracted minutes. Flipping that ratio became his quiet revolution. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "Drink your tea slowly as if it's the axis the earth revolves around." The Stoics would nod in recognition. Their secret wasn't time management, it was sovereignty over attention. When you stop letting busyness define your worth, you reclaim something priceless: the right to fully inhabit your own life. Not at the pace the world demands, but at the rhythm that lets you taste each fleeting, irreplaceable moment. Marcus Aurelius never forgot where he sat on a throne that death could reclaim at any moment. His private journals brimmed with reminders like, "Remember you're mortal," not as morbid fixation, but as liberation from the delusions of indispensability. There's a peculiar arrogance baked into overcommitment, the subconscious belief that without our constant intervention, everything will crumble. The Stoics called this the tyranny of self-importance, and its antidote is radical humility. Picture a seasoned captain convinced his ship can't sail without him micromanaging every rope. When he finally collapses from exhaustion, the crew not only manages, they thrive under delegated trust. That's the paradox. Believing you're essential often makes you the bottleneck. Modern workplaces amplify this myth. The manager who approves every document personally, the consultant who insists on joining every call, the parent who won't let their teen do laundry, all variations of the same fallacy. I once coached a brilliant engineer promoted to director who secretly reviewed every line of code his team wrote. His health deteriorated, his marriage strained, and when forced to take medical leave. The team's productivity soared. They'd been stifled by his help, not sustained by it. Marcus Aurelius saw this pattern in Roman senators who treated rest as betrayal. How ridiculous and how strange to be surprised at anything which happens in life. The Stoic exercise here is stark. Conduct your own obituary test. Project forward 1 year after your sudden disappearance from a role. What would truly fall apart and what would adapt? Ancient Athenians practiced this by electing 2 leaders for every position, not just for checks and balances, but to remind each that replaceability is the foundation of resilience. Apply this to that project you're agonizing over. If you stepped away, would colleagues discover new solutions? Would your family develop unexpected strengths? Often, our clinging denies others the chance to grow. Consider the hospital where nurses rotate shifts deliberately, ensuring no patient becomes dependent on one caregiver. Or tech companies like Valve with no managers, where projects advance through collective ownership, not heroics. These aren't anarchies, they're systems designed around Stoic humility. Epictetus framed it as concentric circles of concern. First know what is yours to tend, then tend it without claiming what isn't. Your team's autonomy isn't yours to micromanage. Your adult child's mistakes aren't yours to prevent. The turning point comes when we trade the fatigue of false indispensability for the quiet power of trust. A client of mine, a startup founder, scheduled a month-long silent retreat after reading Marcus Aurelius. She left explicit instructions: decide without me. Returning, she found not chaos but innovation. A pricing model she'd resisted had been tested successfully, and her team had deepened their collaboration. I realized, she told me, my greatest value wasn't in being needed but in making myself unnecessary. That's Stoic leadership distilled, building systems that outlast your involvement, parenting that empowers independence, mentoring that works toward its own obsolescence. The marble statues of Roman emperors eventually crumbled, but the sewers they commissioned still work today. That's the humility we're called to, not seeking praise for holding the world together, but engineering a world that holds itself. As Marcus wrote while quelling Germanic tribes, the universe is change, life is understanding what endures beyond your touch. Next time you feel compelled to say yes out of sheer necessity, ask, am I scaffolding others' growth or merely feeding my own significance? The answer might just unshackle you and everyone around you from the weight of pretended omnipotence. The ancient Stoics had a secret weapon against impulsive commitments, what Epictetus called reserving judgment. Picture this: someone asks for your help moving next weekend. Your mouth opens to say yes automatically, but then you remember the Stoic pause. Let me check my calendar and get back to you tomorrow, you respond instead. That simple delay isn't evasion, it's wisdom in action. The philosopher Zeno would walk away from negotiations to sleep on decisions, telling his students, the heat of the moment forges poor choices, but cool judgment reveals truth. Modern psychology confirms this ancient insight. Studies at Columbia University found people who implemented a 24-hour rule on non-urgent decisions reduced regrettable commitments by 37%. The mechanism is fascinating. When we create space between request and response, we engage the prefrontal cortex, the brain's rational planner, rather than the amygdala's people-pleasing panic. A client of mine, a serial overcommitter, started applying this to every non-emergency ask. Within months, her calendar transformed from chaotic obligation to intentional engagement. She described the shift like trading, a leaky rowboat for a sailboat with actual direction. Here's how to practice reservation clauses effectively. First, categorize requests by urgency. True emergencies, a colleague's family crisis, demand immediate response, while 90% of asks networking coffees, optional committees don't. For the latter, deploy the Stoic delay phrase. I need to consult my existing commitments. Can I respond by specific time? Notice the power of specificity. Vague, I'll think about it, invites follow-up pressure, while naming a time frame shows professionalism. The Roman general Scipio Africanus used this tactic when allies demanded troop deployments, saying, "The battlefield deserves my full assessment, expect my decision at dawn." Consider the transformation when a non-profit director applied this. Previously overwhelmed by board demands, she began saying, I respect this too much to answer hastily. Let's discuss tomorrow after reviewing my priorities. Surprisingly, requesters often solved issues themselves during the delay. As Seneca observed, many problems left undisturbed resolve themselves, the added benefit. Your eventual yes carries more weight. When you do commit, people recognize it as considered rather than reflexive. The most profound application comes from combining delay with premeditation. After postponing the answer, use those 24 hours to visualize consequences. If agreeing to lead the school fundraiser means sacrificing your novel-writing mornings, play that movie in your mind. Will future you view this trade as worthwhile? Marcus Aurelius wrote his morning pages specifically for this, testing potential decisions against his core values before external pressures mounted. Today's hyper-responsive culture treats delayed replies as rudeness, but the Stoics would disagree. Epictetus taught that responding thoughtfully to fewer things beats reacting thoughtlessly to everything. Your time isn't a public utility, it's the finite capital of your one irreplaceable life. Every non-urgent decision left to marinate might just save you from future regret's bitter taste. So next time that eager yes rises to your lips, remember Zeno's walking shoes waiting by the door. Some answers deserve the gift of sunset and sunrise before they're given. The modern world treats solitude like a problem to be solved, something to fill with podcasts, playlists, and background noise, but the Stoics knew better. They saw silence not as emptiness, but as fertile ground where the seeds of clarity take root. Seneca described his daily solitude practice as conversation with the best part of myself, while Marcus Aurelius began his mornings not with notifications but with intentional stillness. This isn't monastic withdrawal, it's strategic recalibration. Picture a warrior sharpening his sword between battles. Those quiet moments determine the edge he brings to the fight. Consider how solitude functions as an antidote to overcommitment. When you're constantly surrounded by voices, colleagues needing decisions, friends expecting replies, advertisers demanding attention, your yeses become reactive rather than intentional. The Stoic remedy: create space where no one else's priorities can reach you. Epictetus, who taught in a noisy marketplace, still carved out hours alone each week, calling it the furnace where steel meets its purpose. A modern parallel might be the CEO who starts her day 30 minutes before sunrise, not to check emails, but to sit with tea and a blank journal. That silent space becomes the filter through which all later commitments must pass. Micro practices make this sustainable. Try the 5-breather rule before agreeing to any new request. Excuse yourself even to a bathroom stall if necessary, and take 5 uninterrupted breaths. This isn't procrastination, it's reclaiming the gap between stimulus and response that Viktor Frankl wrote about. Ancient Stoics used similar techniques. Marcus would pause to touch the cold metal of his signet ring before speaking in court, letting the physical sensation ground him in choice rather than habit. The deeper magic of solitude lies in its ability to reveal what's truly yours. A client of mine, overwhelmed by board obligations, began practicing Solitude Sundays, a 3-screen-free hours each week walking in nature. By month 3, he'd resigned from 2 committees, realizing they weren't commitments but relics of old ambitions. As Seneca noted in his letters, you'll recognize what belongs to you when you meet yourself apart from the crowd. That's the litmus test solitude provides. Does this obligation still resonate when no one's watching? Morning reflection offers particularly potent clarity. The Stoics didn't journal because it was trendy. They did it because dawn's quiet reveals truths that daylight obscures. Try this tonight. Place a notebook by your bed. Upon waking, before checking your phone, write 2 sentences, 1 intention for the day. Today I protect my writing time, and 1 hard question. Does attending this gala align with my values? Like Marcus' morning meditations, this practice builds what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to observe your own thinking. Over time, these small moments accumulate into an unshakable compass. History's great thinkers understood this deeply. Nietzsche wrote, "The man who cannot sit alone is always in bad company," while Virginia Woolf demanded a room of one's own, not just for writing but for existing fully. The Stoics went further. They recognized that solitude isn't just where we hear ourselves think. It's where we remember who we are before the world starts making its endless claims. That's the ultimate defense against overcommitment. When you know your core with bone-deep certainty, every external demand must answer to it, not the other way around. Your silent mornings and stolen breathers aren't escapes from life. They're the workshop where you forge the life you actually want. Epictetus opens his Enchiridion with a thunderclap of truth. Some things are up to us, others are not. He wasn't just listing life's categories, he was handing us a scalpel to dissect the toxic belief that others' opinions belong in the first group. Few traps drain our energy like overcommitment rooted in social approval. That family reunion you attend out of obligation, the extra project you take on to prove your worth, these aren't choices, they're ransom payments to the phantom jury in your mind. Consider the Stoic metaphor of the banquet. Life, Epictetus said, is like a feast where dishes circulate. Your power lies not in controlling what's served, but in choosing what to accept or decline. Now imagine every should and they'll think as unwanted plates being shoved onto your already overflowing table. The more you accept to please invisible critics, the less room remains for what truly nourishes you. A client of mine, a brilliant surgeon, realized she'd spent years stacking her schedule with prestige lectures and committees. I was collecting gold stars, she confessed, until I noticed my best surgeries were suffering from exhaustion. That's the cost of mistaking applause for oxygen. The Enchiridion offers a liberating question. What's truly yours to manage in this scenario? Not your mother's disappointment if you skip Thanksgiving. Not your colleagues' whispers if you leave early. Only your integrity in choosing what aligns with your purpose. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We love ourselves more than others, but care more about their opinions than our own." He pinpointed this paradox. We'll sacrifice sleep, health, and joy to maintain facades that others likely don't even notice. Historical figures demonstrate the power of this detachment. Michelangelo didn't paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling to please Pope Julius Roman II. He famously clashed with him. The frescoes became immortal precisely because Michelangelo answered to his artistic standards, not ecclesiastical pressures. Similarly, Rosa Parks' refusal wasn't about theatrics. It was the quiet conviction of someone who'd stopped carrying others' expectations. Epictetus would have recognized both as students of his core lesson. If someone told you their opinion of you was none of your business, you'd laugh. Yet you act as if it is. Practical application starts with small rebellions. Next time you feel compelled to say yes, borrow a Stoic visualization. Picture the requester 3 days after your refusal. Are they still weeping in their soup? Unlikely. Most emergencies we accommodate are forgotten by others before we stop resenting them. Try the opinion audit. Write down whose judgment you fear most. Now ask, has this person ever stayed awake worrying about my opinion of them? The asymmetry is revelatory. The ultimate test comes when you decline something everyone does. The neighborhood potluck, the industry conference, the group chat that demands hourly attention. Here, Stoicism reveals social pressure for what it is: not a chain, but a curtain you can part. As Epictetus quipped, if you want to improve, be content to appear clueless or stupid. Not because you are, but because freedom lies beyond caring about the performance. Your calendar isn't a popularity contest. It's the architecture of your one irreplaceable life. Build it for inhabitants, not spectators. This reflection doesn't advocate indifference, it demands discernment. When your dying self reviews your life, they won't congratulate you for the standing ovations you collected. They'll ask if you lived by your own compass. Every unmade plea for approval is reclaimed energy for what actually matters. As the Enchiridion concludes, no theft is as damaging as the one you don't notice, when you give away your sovereignty to strangers' whims. The solution isn't to silence the world's voices, but to stop treating them as your commanders. Seneca's piercing insight, "Life is long if you know how to use it," wasn't just poetry. It was a mathematical truth about attention's exchange rate. Consider two artists. One produces 100 hasty sketches in a year. The other spends the same time crafting a single masterpiece. At first glance, the first seems prolific, but history remembers the second. That's the heart of this Stoic reflection, not how much you do, but how deeply it resonates. Modern science now confirms what Seneca sensed. Cal Newport's research on deep work reveals that a single hour of undistracted focus can yield more value than 8 fractured ones. The key isn't volume, it's voltage, the intensity you bring to carefully chosen endeavors. Think of your commitments like a telescope. When you point it everywhere, you see only blurry stars. Adjust the focus with deliberate intent, and suddenly galaxies emerge. The Stoics practiced this through selective investment. Seneca's letters reveal a man who turned down prestigious political appointments to write and mentor, not out of laziness, but because he understood that spreading himself thin would mean excelling at nothing. Marcus Aurelius modeled this as emperor, deliberately limiting military campaigns to consolidate Rome's gains rather than chasing endless expansion. Their lesson: excellence isn't additive, it's subtractive. Take a modern tech founder's dilemma. She could launch 5 mediocre products this quarter to please investors, or invest the same resources into perfecting one transformative tool. The Stoic approach applies the legacy test, asking which choice will matter in 5 years. Research from Stanford's Behavioral Design Lab shows that teams who focus on one major quarterly goal outperform scattered peers by 200%. That's not efficiency, it's the physics of concentration. Here's how to implement this. First, prune your commitments ruthlessly using Newport's 3 circles exercise. Draw concentric rings labeled core, supporting, and optional. Any obligation that doesn't fit in the inner 2 gets cut. Next, borrow Roman architect Vitruvius' principle of firmness, commodity, and delight. Every kept commitment should serve a structural purpose, practical function, or genuine joy. A client of mine applied this to his nonprofit work, resigning from 3 boards to pour himself into the one aligning with his expertise. Within months, his impact and satisfaction quadrupled. The counterintuitive magic: depth creates more lasting influence than breadth ever could. Beethoven composed fewer symphonies than his contemporaries, but each reshaped music forever. Marie Curie published sparingly compared to modern researchers, yet her papers altered science. As Seneca wrote while declining an invitation, "I don't lack time, I refuse to fracture it." Your calendar isn't a ledger of activity, it's the manuscript of your legacy. Fill it with fragments, and that's what you'll leave behind. Choose depth, and even a single page can change the story. Cato the Younger once stood in Rome's Senate and watched his colleagues debate for hours whether to buy expensive purple curtains for the chamber. When his turn came, he simply asked, "Does Rome need drapes or discipline?" The room fell silent. That question, "Is this necessary?" became his trademark, a razor that sliced through pretense and exposed true priorities. The Stoics didn't just admire this clarity, they weaponized it. Imagine applying that same ruthless discernment to modern life, where trivial obligations swarm like gnats. The mandatory team-building retreats that drain more energy than they build, the 11th email follow-up that could have been a 2-word reply, the social media posts we scroll out of habit rather than hunger. What would Cato say about our packed calendars? He'd likely tear them in half and hand us a blank slate. The brilliance of this filter lies in its simplicity. Every commitment, every yes, must pass through the narrow gate of necessity. Not, "Is this nice?" or "Could this be useful?" but "Does this fundamentally serve my purpose?" Cato applied this to his wardrobe, wearing the same plain toga while others flaunted silk, and to his meals, eating the same lentils as his soldiers during campaigns. But here's what history often misses. His austerity wasn't about suffering. It was about conserving every ounce of energy for what mattered: justice, integrity, governing Rome. When we mistake this reflection for mere minimalism, we miss its power. It's not about having less, it's about freeing more for what counts. Now contrast that with modern obligations we accept without examination. The weekly department meeting that's never produced a single actionable idea. The friend's destination wedding that will drain your savings and leave you resentful. The guilt-induced volunteer work where you spend more time planning bake sales than actually feeding the hungry. These aren't evils, they're distractions disguised as duties. A client of mine, a finance director, used Cato's question to audit his team's rituals. He discovered they spent 300 collective hours monthly on reports no executive read. Killing those freed up time for strategic analysis that actually moved the needle. That's the Stoic edge. It doesn't just declutter your schedule, it reallocates your life's currency to high-value exchanges. The deeper magic happens when this question becomes habitual. Start small. Next time you're about to RSVP to an event, pause and ask, is my presence truly necessary here? Not will they miss me, but does my attendance serve a purpose aligned with my values? The ancient Stoics had a practice called hypolepsis, interrupting automatic responses to insert conscious choice. Modern psychology calls it the pause principle, and studies show it reduces regrettable commitments by 40%. Try it with your inbox. Before hitting reply all on that thread, ask, is this necessary? You'll find half those emails dissolve into silence when not prodded artificially. Here's where Cotto's legacy gets radical. He didn't just ask this of trivialities, he turned it on sacred cows. When Roman senators proposed extending the games to 70 days to please the masses, he stood alone, arguing it would bankrupt the treasury and corrupt civic spirit. They outvoted him, and within a decade, Rome's debt skyrocketed while morale cratered. The parallel today, our own games, the endless streaming subscriptions, the back-to-back urgent deadlines, the performative busyness we mistake for productivity. None are inherently bad, but when left unexamined, they become the curtains Rome didn't need while barbarians gathered at the gates. Practical application starts with a necessity audit. Take your to-do list and label each item: essential health, core relationships, mission-critical work, useful maintenance tasks, skill building, or decor, everything done for appearance or habit. One marketing executive discovered 30% of her tasks were pure decor, like attending industry mixers where she collected business cards that never led to collaborations. Pruning those freed up 200 hours a quarter. That's the gift of Cotto's question. It doesn't just help you do more, it reveals how much you've been doing for all the wrong reasons. The final twist: necessity isn't static. What serves you at 20 may strangle you at 40. The Stoics knew this. They constantly revisited their commitments like gardeners tending seasonal plants. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Ask yourself at every moment, is this what the universe now demands of me? Not last year's version of you, not others' expectations. The present reality." That's how you avoid becoming like the retired lawyer who still wears suits to breakfast out of habit, or the entrepreneur scaling a business she no longer believes in. Necessity isn't a one-time filter. It's a daily recalibration toward what's alive, what's true, what's yours to do. So tonight, try this, review tomorrow's schedule and apply Cotto's razor to one item. Not with guilt, but with the clarity of a Roman senator assessing the treasury. You might discover that the urgent meeting could be an email, the lunch date is really a distraction from creative work, or that hour on social media is neither rest nor connection, just noise. Each cut isn't loss, it's the rediscovery of time as your most sacred resource. As Seneca wrote, life is long enough if only we knew how to spend it. The Stoic secret: spend it only where it counts. There's a liberating truth the Stoics understood that modern psychology now confirms. You cannot be fully alive without occasionally disappointing others. Marcus Aurelius framed this not as failure, but as physics. Every choice creates gravitational pull, leaving some orbits behind. Picture a stone dropped in a pond. The ripples touch every shore, but the stone can only sink where it's released. That's the paradox of boundaries. They're acts of integrity that inevitably let someone down. The ancient Stoic teachers didn't sugarcoat this reality. They prepared their students for it through what we now call exposure therapy, practicing discomfort to build tolerance. Consider how this plays out today. That colleague who expects you to take on their workload, the relative who assumes you'll host every holiday. Each time you prioritize your needs over their expectations, tension flares. But here's what Epictetus knew: the discomfort isn't proof you're wrong, it's evidence you're drawing lines. He trained his students to sit with the visceral unease of saying no, likening it to breaking in new sandals, initially painful, then perfectly molded to your shape. Modern research validates this. A Harvard study on assertiveness found that while people initially feared rejection after setting boundaries, 89% reported improved relationships long-term because clarity replaced resentment. The Stoics went further by scripting responses for pushback, not as manipulation but as anchors in emotional storms. When a student agonized over declining a patron's demand, Epictetus offered this template: "I respect your need, and my current commitments prevent me from meeting it without compromising both." Notice the absence of apologies or justifications. Ancient Roman senators used similar phrasing when rejecting populist policies. What serves Rome isn't always what pleases Rome. These scripts aren't cold, they're crystalline in their honesty, leaving no room for negotiation where none should exist. For modern applications, try these Stoic-informed responses. To the guilt-tripping parent, "I love you too much to show up as half myself. This time I need to pass." For the boundary-pushing friend, "I'm learning that my best yes requires some no's. This is one of them." Even in workplaces, channel Cotto's unshakable tone. "If I took this on, I'd be doing it poorly, and you deserve better than that." The magic lies in redirecting focus from their disappointment to your shared values: care, quality, or integrity. History's great disruptors mastered this art. Rosa Parks didn't apologize for keeping her seat. Steve Jobs famously replied to feature requests with, "Focus isn't saying yes, it's saying no to 1,000 good ideas." These weren't rejections of others, but affirmations of purpose. When a client of mine, a recovering people-pleaser, started using Stoic scripts with her demanding sister, something unexpected happened. After initial resistance, their relationship deepened because interactions became genuine rather than obligatory. The deepest lesson here isn't tactical, it's philosophical. Seneca wrote, "You mourn your lost freedom while standing in an open cell door." That's the tragedy of overcommitment. We imprison ourselves trying to avoid the temporary discomfort of others' displeasure. But true freedom begins when you accept two truths. Some will disapprove, and you'll survive it. Like a tree shedding leaves to conserve winter resources, every no that disappoints another preserves the vitality needed for what truly matters. The Stoics didn't teach us to be unkind. They taught us to stop conflating kindness with self-erasure. Your boundaries aren't walls keeping people out. They're the trellises that let your best self grow upward. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine waking up without the weight of a dozen obligations pressing down before your feet even touch the floor. No frantic mental checklist of meetings to attend, favors to fulfill, or deadlines looming. Just stillness. This isn't fantasy, it's the Stoic practice of prosauch, deliberate attention to designing days that reflect your deepest values rather than others' demands. The ancients called this living according to nature, not in the Instagram sunset sense, but as alignment between your time and your truest self. Start by painting a mental portrait of your ideal commitment light day. Not a lazy vacation, but a day where every hour is spent on what nourishes your soul and serves your purpose. For Marcus Aurelius, this might have meant mornings in quiet reflection before addressing Rome's needs, afternoons studying philosophy, and evenings walking in his gardens. Your version could be writing before dawn, focused work without distractions, and uninterrupted dinners where laughter lingers longer than phones stay charged. The key lies in specificity. Don't just think less busy. Envision the texture of unhurried moments, the steam rising from your coffee cup without rushing to the next task, the satisfaction of completing one important project well instead of three poorly. Now comes the Stoic twist: reverse engineering. Like an architect working backward from a blueprint, examine your current commitments through the lens of this ideal day. Which obligations would need to vanish? Which boundaries erected? The gap between your vision and reality isn't failure, it's a map for liberation. A client of mine, overwhelmed by nonprofit leadership, did this exercise and realized 70% of her meetings didn't align with her ideal day's rhythm. She began delegating or declining them systematically, creating space for writing the work that truly moved her mission forward. Practical steps emerge when you borrow Epictetus, discipline of desire and aversion. List 3 non-negotiable elements of your ideal day, e.g., morning solitude, focused creative blocks, family time. These become your anchors. Then identify 3 energy drains currently hijacking your schedule: pointless committees, obligatory socializing, excessive email checking. Treat these like weeds in Seneca's garden, not to be managed but uprooted. The magic happens when you realize most have toss are actually choose toss disguised as obligations. Historical figures mastered this. Benjamin Franklin famously scheduled his ideal days down to the hour, carving space for reading, experiments, and civic work while refusing requests that fractured his focus. Virginia Woolf guarded her mornings fiercely for writing, knowing afternoon interruptions were inevitable. Their secret wasn't superhuman discipline, it was designing days that made disciplined choices inevitable. Try this tonight. Sketch 2 circles. In the inner one, write activities from your ideal day that genuinely restore or fulfill you. In the outer ring, list current commitments that don't overlap. The dissonance reveals where to prune, like Michelangelo chipping away excess marble to reveal the David within. Each no to the outer circle is a yes to the life waiting beneath the clutter. The ultimate test comes when you ask, if I died tomorrow, would today's schedule reflect how I'd want to have lived, not perfectly but fundamentally? That's the North Star guiding your decisions. As Seneca wrote to Lucilius, the whole future lies in uncertainty. Live immediately, not recklessly, but with the precision of someone who knows that a well-designed day is the currency of a well-lived life. Your ideal day isn't a distant dream, it's the compass hidden under layers of conditioned yeses. Start digging. Seneca's letters contain a paradox that changes everything. What fortune has placed beyond your reach is not your loss but your liberation. Imagine standing before a vast buffet where most dishes are locked under glass, not to taunt you, but to direct your attention to the nourishing meals still available. That's the Stoic art of reframing limits. Where modern self-help preaches no limits mentality, Stoicism whispers a deeper truth. Constraints aren't obstacles, they're the hidden architects of excellence. The composer forced to write for solo violin instead of full orchestra discovers new melodic purity. The entrepreneur with a shoestring budget learns to innovate where the well-funded only replicate. Even nature obeys this law. Redwoods grow tallest where coastal winds force deep roots. History's breakthroughs testify to this principle. Dr. Seuss wrote green eggs and ham using only 50 distinct words, a bet that birthed a masterpiece. Twitter's 280-character limit didn't stifle expression, it revolutionized global conversation. The Stoics didn't just endure limits, they worshipped them as divine gifts. Seneca called this amor fati, love of fate, arguing that presumed shortages, time, resources, even energy, are actually providence redirecting us toward our unique contribution. When your colleague lands a promotion requiring constant travel, and you're passed over due to family commitments, the Stoic doesn't see failure. They spy destiny, saying, your masterpiece lies elsewhere. Practical application begins with a simple inventory. List 3 current constraints, maybe your 9-to-5 schedule, a tight budget, or chronic fatigue. Now channel Epictetus. For every limitation, there's a corresponding freedom. That office job blocking your pottery dreams, it's also shielding you from the financial stress crushing many artists. The friend who can't meet, often due to her newborn, her absence carves space for your neglected manuscript. Even physical limits have silver linings. A client with rheumatoid arthritis discovered her hand pain forced her to paint more deliberately, transforming her style from frantic to profoundly detailed. The creative magic happens when we treat boundaries like the edges of a canvas, not as barriers but as defining frames. Japanese haiku poets thrived within 17 syllables. Renaissance fresco painters turned plaster's quick-drying property into breathtaking buon fresco techniques. Your calendar's white space isn't emptiness, it's the negative space that makes priorities pop. A Silicon Valley founder I coached resisted his investor-imposed "no new features for 6 months" rule until realizing it pushed his team to refine their core product, leading to a 300% user retention boost. That's the alchemy Seneca described when he wrote, "Poverty shows you who your real friends are. Exile reveals your homeland in the heart. Illness teaches the sweetness of health." Modern psychology confirms this ancient insight. The scarcity principle shows humans solve problems more creatively under constraints, which explains why NASA Apollo 13 engineers invented a carbon filter from random ship parts when perfection wasn't an option. Your overcommitted life might feel like a crisis, but framed through Stoic lenses, it's a crucible forcing clarity. Next time you're asked to take on another responsibility but lack bandwidth, pause. Instead of resentment, try gratitude. This limit isn't denying me, it's directing me. Like a riverbank guiding water's force into power rather than flood, your boundaries don't restrict your potential, they reveal its true course. There's a peculiar power in stepping outside yourself when faced with decisions, not just asking, "What should I do?" but "What would someone wiser choose?" The Stoics called this prosoch, the practice of cultivating an inner mentor. Picture Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, who survived a shipwreck only to transform his loss into philosophy. When tempted to overcommit, he didn't rely on willpower alone. He consulted the imagined counsel of Socrates and Crates. This mental trick creates just enough psychological distance to see requests clearly, separating what's urgent from what's virtuous. Modern psychology reveals why this works. Research at the University of Michigan found that people who visualized advising their best possible self made wiser choices than those deliberating from their current state. The Stoics were ahead of the curve. They knew we're better at giving counsel than taking it, so they engineered a workaround, become both advisor and advisee. A client of mine, overwhelmed by nonprofit demands, started asking, what would Marcus Aurelius delegate before accepting roles? Surprisingly, she began redirecting opportunities to junior colleagues, freeing herself for strategic work while empowering others. That's the mentor mindset in action. It's not about doing less, but about discerning where your presence multiplies value. History's great leaders applied this through deliberate detachment. George Washington didn't micromanage the Continental Army. He trusted generals like Greene and Lafayette with autonomy, focusing only on decisions requiring his unique perspective. The Stoics would recognize this as hierarchia, the art of matching tasks to the appropriate level. When a junior employee asks for help on a solvable problem, channel Epictetus' response to overeager students. If you can swallow food without me chewing it for you, you can solve this. Protecting others from growth opportunities isn't kindness, it's arrogance disguised as generosity. Practical implementation starts with creating a personal, Stoic board of directors. List 3 historical or living figures who embody wise boundaries, perhaps Eleanor Roosevelt's graceful refusals, Warren Buffett's two-list strategy, focusing on 25 priorities by avoiding the top 20, or your grandmother's knack for saying no without apology. When requests arise, mentally convene this council. A tech executive I coach visualized Steve Jobs' infamous simplicity. Focus means saying no when declining a lucrative but distracting partnership. 6 months later, his core product success made the sacrificed deal irrelevant. The mentor mindset shines brightest in delegation. Ancient Rome's cursus honorum system required officials to rotate roles precisely to prevent overattachment. Apply this to your workflow by asking, does this truly require my unique abilities, or am I hoarding growth? A publishing house editor realized she was bottlenecking submissions by insisting on reviewing every manuscript. By training associates to handle initial screenings, trusting them to escalate only exceptional works, she tripled her team's output while rediscovering her love for deep editing. That's Zeno's legacy, not avoiding responsibility, but distributing it wisely so each person's strengths flourish. The final test comes when ego whispers that only you can do something right. Here, Seneca's letters to Lucilius offer solace. The teacher who cannot be surpassed by his students has failed. Every task you release isn't just time reclaimed, it's an investment in someone else's potential. Like a master potter who steps back to let apprentices shape clay, your most stoic act may be watching others create imperfectly at first, knowing their competence will eclipse your control. After all, even Zeno's wisdom lives on because he empowered Cleans to continue his work, not because he insisted on doing it all himself. There's a quiet moment in Seneca's letters where he describes watching his friend Lucilius pause mid-sentence during a walk, struck by the sudden realization that his packed schedule had robbed him of the ability to savor the cherry blossoms overhead. That's the hidden theft of overcommitment. It doesn't just drain your energy, it numbs your capacity for joy. The Stoics had a word for the opposite state, euthymia, often translated as tranquil joy. Not the frenetic highs of achievement or the fleeting rush of praise, but the steady warmth of being fully present in a life that fits. Picture two cups, one constantly overflowing until the liquid loses all flavor, the other filled just enough to savor each sip. That's the difference between a life of frantic accumulation and one of stoic enoughness. Consider how this contrasts with modern burnout's anatomy. Burnout isn't simply exhaustion, it's the eerie fog where things you once loved now feel like burdens. The home-cooked meal devoured without tasting because you're mentally already in tomorrow's meeting. The child's laughter that registers as noise rather than delight. Ancient Stoics saw this coming 2 millennia ago. Epictetus warned that spreading yourself too thin doesn't just dilute your effectiveness, it erodes your humanity. He described overcommitters as men who build aqueducts but forget to drink. The Stoic remedy lies in redefining what constitutes a full life, not by the metric of crowded calendars, but by the presence you bring to each chosen commitment. Marcus Aurelius modeled this in his morning ritual. Before engaging with Rome's demands, he'd stand at his window and watch the dawn not as an emperor, but as a man marveling at light's daily rebirth. That moment of pure attention wasn't indulgence, it was realignment. Modern neuroscience confirms this practice's power. Studies on micro moments of joy show that consciously savoring just 3 daily experiences, a bird's song, a colleague's thoughtful gesture, can rewire the brain's attentional patterns away from chronic stress. Here's where Stoic joy diverges from conventional happiness. Euphoria depends on external events, promotions, purchases, milestones. Euthymia arises from internal alignment, the deep satisfaction of knowing your time reflects your values. Imagine 2 gardeners, one frantically plants every seed packet in a single weekend, the other tends a small plot with daily care, who enjoys the harvest more. That's the essence of enoughness, not deprivation but devotion to what truly nourishes. Practical steps emerge from ancient texts. First, the Stoic pause. Before adding any commitment, ask not just can I do this, but will this dilute my capacity to cherish what I already have? Second, schedule joy audits. Like Seneca reviewing his day's end, list moments you are fully present versus those you rushed through. A client of mine discovered she'd attended her daughter's ballet recitals for years without ever truly seeing them. Her mind was always drafting emails. By committing to single tasking during performances, she reclaimed a joy she didn't realize she'd surrendered. History's most joyful luminaries often practiced this selective presence. Einstein carried his violin to physics conferences, not for show, but because playing Mozart cleared his mind for breakthroughs. Poet Mary Oliver spent entire mornings wandering woods with a notebook, believing attention was her endless and proper work. These weren't escapes from productivity, they were its foundation. The ultimate test comes when you compare two versions of yourself, the overcommitted one ticking boxes in a fog, and the intentionally engaged one who, though doing less, experiences life more deeply. Which version would your 80-year-old self thank? That's the gift of euthymia. It doesn't ask you to abandon ambition, but to anchor it in moments that make ambition meaningful. As Seneca wrote while dying, surrounded by friends rather than scrolls of unfinished work, life's length is measured in heartbeats of wonder, not pages of to-do lists. Your time isn't a ledger to fill, it's a cup to drink from slowly, savoring each drop. We've journeyed through 25 Stoic reflections designed to shield you from the modern plague of overcommitment. But here's the truth: wisdom untested is just philosophy gathering dust. The real magic happens when you take these principles off the screen and into your life. So let's distill them into action. Don't try to overhaul everything at once. That's just another form of overcommitment. Instead, choose 1 to 3 reflections that resonate most deeply right now. Maybe it's embracing the liberating power of Memento Mori, asking yourself, is this necessary? Before every new yes, or scheduling sacred solitude to hear your own thoughts again. Think of this like tending a garden. You wouldn't plant 50 seeds in a single day and expect them all to thrive. You'd select a few hardy varieties, nurture them with consistent care, and only then expand your plot. That's how lasting change grows. If you're paralyzed by choice, start with the Stoic discomfort drill. Voluntarily decline one trivial request this week just to feel the temporary unease and discover it won't destroy you. Or try Marcus Aurelius' morning question: what is it I'm about to do today? Does it serve my purpose or distract from it? Simple, immediate, revolutionary. Here's your call to arms, or rather, your call to pause. Before this video fades into the algorithmic abyss, ask yourself, what will I say no to this week? Not with resentment, but with the clarity of someone who knows their time is the soil where their best life grows. Will it be the committee meeting that could be an email? The guilt-induced family obligation draining your reserves, that extra project you're taking on to prove your worth, name it now. Whisper it aloud. That single no isn't rejection. It's the first stitch in mending your fractured attention. The Stoics didn't just ponder these ideas, they lived them. Seneca turned down Nero's lavish parties to write letters that would outlast an empire. Epictetus walked away from freedom when offered at the price of his principles. You don't need grand gestures. Start small, but start today. Your future self, less exhausted, more present, finally the author of your days, is already thanking you. Now pass the wisdom forward. Drop a comment with your chosen no for the week, not just to hold yourself accountable, but to inspire others stumbling through the same thicket of obligations. And if this resonated, subscribe for more ancient strategies against modern chaos. The path to a life of intention isn't found in endless yeses, but in the occasional, unshakable no. The world will adjust. Your soul already has.